I'd like to say thank you to all the presenters in this section, and I think that what you've just heard is an incredible way of setting up the next two sessions, where we start to talk more about what the word public means, or publicness, and this is kind of the question of public and private kind of really evolved into that in this session. And also what a museum is a repository for, or what we need to be thinking about, kind of holding within it. I want to open it up for questions as soon as possible, so please start putting up your hands so I can start to see how many of you have questions, because our time is a little bit shorter than we first planned. But I thought that I'd start it by seeing if I can get the three of you to talk to each other. Because I think that it's interesting. Maria this morning started by talking about the futurist, or the Museum of the Future, being about innovation and formal and technical invention. And what all of you have kind of suggested in looking to the future is that you all need to be looking to the past in a way that is perhaps different to what was being considered this morning. But you have to imagine that part, or we have to imagine that past from the present, and think about the alternative narratives that have been missing in each of our contexts. So I wonder, I'm not sure if you have comments in terms of the what you've heard from each other, but I wonder if you can kind of comment on a personal basis about what the way that you're thinking about the kind of future in relation to now for the museums, or for the way that you're working in museums. Whoever wants to. Do you want to start, Christian?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I don't even know where to begin with that. I think, unlike my two colleagues here, I'm not a director of an institution, so the way I speak about MoMA as a royal we rings different than I think others. I'm one member of a very large professional staff, so when I talk about MoMA in regard to plans for the future, it comes from a different place. So I just wanted to send that as a caveat. I think one of the aspects that I was trying to make clear in the presentation is that over the last 80 or 90 years that MoMA has existed, 80 plus years, part of its incredible success has been from a small gesture of filling a void, of writing, of presenting modern art in a city that was, as a city, very modern, like New York in the 1920s, but didn't have an established place for representing the history of modern art appropriately, to having fulfilled that mission so convincingly that we are now kind of, we've sort of fallen victim of our own success and have to counter the kind of, one could say, ideological force of that narrative by trying to kind of take a broader look. So I ended up on a slide that in a way represents our own attempts at engaging with a much more layered, broader, more global, and also chronologically or temporally more kind of complicated idea of what a modernist narrative in terms of timeline might suggest. So in a way, we're sort of battling with the success of our own past in order to, kind of create new opportunities for the future. And I think one of the things that I hope was coming clear is that in the 1930s or even in the 1950s, the idea of a future and the idea of the future as being actively shaped by the art of its time was, very much sort of at the forefront of everybody's idea. And I think we've come to a point where we no longer think maybe because we're thinking museologically, but we no longer think that somehow the idea of a future is readily available through art, but has to be unearthed in different ways. So the future is a very difficult question for us to answer.
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, the whole issue, which is in Palestine, revolves about the existential question. It's like we were there, they were there, who was there before whom, and myself kind of trying to take a position where it's not about kind of documenting and stating facts about the past, but more or less using that past as a reference for what we're trying and how we're trying to reconfigure our identity into the future. But I can also think about kind of general political, how should I say, tracks that, for example, other countries have taken. If you look at the example of the Gulf and what they've tried in all their projects in kind of building new museums in the Emirates and Qatar and other Gulf countries, their concept of the museum is very much about bridging that region, which is supposedly kind of conceived as an kind of in the backwaters of the world and kind of completely isolated, bridging that place and that culture with the rest of the world, with especially particularly with the Western world, and that's why they've signed agreements with the kind of the Louvre and the Guggenheim and what have you. So it's again, as I said in my paper, there's a political context and that somehow defines the positioning. So I don't know much about now Russia, but it is about what this political context and how the government, of course, driven by the people, its community, and where it wants to go.
Do you want to comment on that? Questions from the floor? None after all of that.
So we can go home.
Добрый день, у меня
Good afternoon. I have a question to all the three speakers. And my question is the following. Many museums, many galleries has started the following practice. When some exposition is arranged and they don't give an explanation to each painting. So they just give short information about the painter who made this painting, nothing more during the exposition. What is your attitude to it?
I think that there's probably as many different answers to that as there are people who are curating. I think the whole way of thinking through how to present each work in relation to itself and in like next door to the work that it's sitting beside and in relation to the concept of the exhibition itself and what it's trying to talk about in relation to culture or society should lead to a decision being made as to how to put the information on the label next door to that work.
Thank you very much for your presentations. My question lies in the area of the educational aspect of museums. So museums have always been a platform for inspiring art education, right? But I'm very much interested in the interdisciplinary opportunities that we might have, which you might be thinking about as some projects which you are planning to develop or are already developing. I mean, I'm a representative of a company which organizes business trainings which enhance business skills through art, through understanding arts, through understanding music, through immersing into this rather different context for businessmen and developing different kinds of thinking, different channels of percepting reality. Do you have, so as representatives of these museums, do you have any projects which are platforms for developing interdisciplinary skills educate themselves? Thank you.
Hello. In our, for example, in our school, there's not. It doesn't. In contemporary art school, you don't have to be the artist. You can be any person can come and join the school and get many things out of it. I mean, basically, you don't have to have a diploma previously. You can be just visiting specialist or person who wants to get involved and learn something more. Apart from that, we have lectures which tend to, for any person, get to understand about history of arts of 20th century, 21st century, art and cinema, art and design, art and film and photography. So there's different lectures that are tuned for different kind of public, which not necessarily are artists or art historians. So in that aspect, we have certain things, but we don't have that particular thing that you mentioned.
I mean, if there is one thing that could be seen as the primary ideology, if you will, of the Museum of Modern Art from its inception, then it is the idea that it should train or enable its visitors and the people who look at the art to get a sort of, how can I say, an aesthetic vocabulary to discern within everything that surrounds them in the everyday life, in the world, that which is modern and that which is not modern. So if you look at a lot of the architecture and design exhibitions, but also the visual art exhibitions from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and onwards, they had a very particular kind of educational mission to say, this is what we consider good design, this is what we consider not so good design. So in a way, the exhibitions themselves were conceived as educational exercises to sort of discern in the world what was, of a kind of modern or modernist aesthetic value. I cannot speak for everything that our education department is doing in relation to the exhibitions, in relation to the collections of the museum. We have a large staff with a very broad variety of offerings. I think what you're alluding to is a kind of an interpretation of certain artistic vocabularies or artistic processes that can very easily be translated into a sort of managerial language, sort of empathetic intelligence or creativity as a force or something like that. And I think the museum does not engage in those kind of things. I think we're believing very strongly in the primacy of the work, and hopefully through understanding, learning, engaging with the artwork itself, you're sharpening your aesthetic sensibilities to make sense of the world that surrounds you in different ways, rather than sort of using, procedures that we perceive to be artistic in order to engage, in a kind of shorthand with, management skills or something like that. So I think we're throwing it back, or I would throw it back to say, look at the art. Most of the good art is so challenging and so intelligent that everything that you need to learn is already in the work if you know how to read it.
There was a question in the middle of the room.
Я хотел бы задать вот какой вопрос.
I'd like to ask the following question. There is a definition of a museum given by the International Committee of Museums. Do you think that there are contradictions between ICOM definition and your understanding of the Museum of Modern Art? Thank you.
Like to answer that question, or is it for whoever would like to respond?
No, I'd like the speakers to give an answer. He means I'd like all speakers to give this reply. Please, dear speakers, answer the question.
Try, but но я попытаюсь в основном.
I will try to state my point of view. The museum is an institution that is to discharge the main functions of collecting, storing, maintaining, and presenting to a wide audience though that cultural heritage that is a subject of this museum's storage and maintenance. Well, this is how I see it.
By saying that if you've looked at the video that I showed you, it's exactly about that. It's collecting the stories and objects and presenting them to the widest possible audience. So by doing so, it's carrying on this story from the past into the present and hopefully into the future.
And maybe it's the question is, what we're talking about, a reflexive museum, or we're exploring this question of what a museum could be, and it comes back to this question of like which narratives, whose stories, what constitutes the thing that you are or the things that you are conserving and storing. And I think maybe that's one of the ways in which people are kind of rethinking what that definition is, kind of bringing in alternative narratives, perhaps.
Yeah, starting from the widest possible narratives, and then gradually focusing it on particular themes or topics or issues of concern to the museum management and, of course, the public, the audience.
Московский музей, безусловно, соответствует тем принципам собирания.
The Moscow Museum corresponds with the principles, with the definition of a museum, and each exhibition is the result of scientific processing of those pieces of art that are stored in the museum. And it is done by a large number of employees, of people who are experts in this field. We are members of ICOM and we comply with all the parameters. Так, у нас есть вопрос еще. У нас есть...
There you go. Can you pass the microphone to the center?
Thank you very much for great presentations, and I would like to know your opinion and maybe possible solutions towards the problem of travel and exhibition, like exporting your most successful content to other countries and other cultures. Do you think that it is possible, and if it is necessary, to make any adjustments toward the local culture, because it is known that in the different countries and cultures there are different cultural narratives which are closer or more distinct to these cultures. Do you think that the content of the travel and exhibition could be altered to a different national context, if it is important and if it is possible to do so? Thank you.
I can tell you from our kind of position, or what we're planning. As I was saying, we're trying to serve the largest possible public or audience, and since our audience is basically dispersed almost all over the world, hence whatever we come up with in terms of concepts for programs, for exhibitions, we need to kind of take into consideration the different iterations of these ideas in the different countries and places that we would like this to go. As I said, we have these insurmountable restrictions on our mobility, and hence in the thinking of the making of this museum, we're actually not so focused on the building and the site itself, but more or less on the network and the nodes of where this museum is gonna appear. And hence, it is in the making of every project. So this project that I showed you in the video involves many people from different parts of the world. So what we're trying to now think, because again of the context of the restrictions, of the impossibilities, what we're trying to do is to maybe do the exhibition in different places, but stemming from the stories and the objects of the people in those places. So if we're doing something in, say, in Birzeit, but we're doing also another exhibition in Amman, Jordan, or in Beirut, Lebanon, or in Santiago, Chile, or wherever, we would want to basically take what's there locally from the people who live there, from the people who form part of the public who would become audience to this exhibition. And hence, I think, I would say, generally, I think, yes, definitely, when you're doing something and you're thinking that this thing is going to go to other places, it would make much more sense that this thing is basically contextualized in that particular, and takes into consideration whatever culture, history, tradition, values in those places.
I would like to answer your question by rephrasing it and posing it back to you, or rephrasing it and putting it back into your mouth, which is, I don't think it's a problem of traveling exhibitions alone. It's a problem that begins right at home in our museum. Over 60% of our audience comes from abroad. Not just national visitors from outside of New York, but are literally from Russia, from Brazil, from China, from Italy, from Germany, from the United Kingdom, from the Netherlands, and so on. And we've experienced that it is extremely hard for us to gauge what kind of information to provide for the exhibitions and for the collection inside our museum, because it's very hard to gauge what prior knowledge and what cultural context the visitor will bring to the work. Our education department did some attempts where they tried to engage visitors in a sort of questionnaire and enactment in the galleries, trying to quiz them and ask them about some of their experiences. And they realized that in more than 60% of the cases, that engagement failed because the visitors didn't speak English. So they developed a sort of system where that entire interrogation existed through visual forms, through like pictograms and images, because that was a way to communicate with a very, very international audience. In another way, I would say, I can speak from my own experience only. I don't know how other curators or how other institutions or how other exhibitions that have traveled from MoMA has handled that question. But my answer would be that in most cases, the exhibitions themselves don't change all that much. We're not gearing exhibitions towards particular cultural contexts, but we experience how the exhibitions themselves change when placed in a different context. And I think that experience is something to be sensitive to. That, not only do I think that maybe these works are received differently in different contexts, but to me, the works themselves and the meaning of the works themselves change. I see them anew as a curator, thinking that I know them very much by placing them in a different context. So I think it's a question that is much broader than in a way that you've posed it.
Okay, so we are 10 minutes behind. So we have a 15-minute break, so it means we need to meet back here at 4:25 for session number 3. Thank you very much to the speakers of this session.